Hello, you, and hello to our other friends who recently subscribed to content around the Balkan narrative. Welcome back.
Glad to be here.
We're doing another deep dive today, focusing on a really difficult subject, the causes of the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Yes, the conflict from 92 to 95. The sources we're looking at, they really underscored the devastation.
They do. Numbers like nearly 200,000 casualties, 2 million displaced, huge destruction.
And the sources frame it, importantly, as aggression primarily from Serbia and Bosnian Serbs, and also some aggressive Croatian elements against Bosnia.
So our goal today is to unpack the factors that led to this, sticking strictly to what these sources tell us.
It's complex, no doubt. A lot stems from the collapse of Yugoslavia, the Socialist Federal Republic.
You had the Yugoslav People's Army.
It's sort of dissolving or changing sides, fighting against the republics, wanting out Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia.
And the sources suggest that after communism ended, Yugoslavia just lost its reason to exist?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
That unifying ideology was gone, and that created a vacuum.
Okay, so what do the sources pinpoint as the main cause? Seems like one big theme is Serbian nationalism.
Absolutely. Starting, they say, from the mid-'80s, it wasn't just politics, it generated real fear in the other republics. Fear of, well, ethnic cleansing.
And this nationalism, it sort of enabled the whole breakup.
That's the argument in the material, yeah. It was the catalyst. And linked to that
Go on.
is this alleged secret deal between the Serbian and Croatian presidents.
To divide Bosnia.
Exactly, to partition it. The sources mention it came out later, like at the Karađorđevo trial.
And then Bosnian, Serb, and Croat leaders met to actually plan it out.
In May 92, yes. The sources describe follow-up meetings aimed at implementing that partition.
So why Bosnia specifically? What was the obstacle?
Well, the sources point to the large Muslim population, around 43%. They were seen as standing in the way of
the Greater Serbia and Greater Croatia ideas.
Precisely. That's the terminology used in the sources, Milosevic's vision and Tudjman's vision.
Interesting. The sources also bring in the U.S.
Yeah, a third factor they identify is U.S. policy. The idea presented is that Yugoslavia was useful during the Cold War, a buffer state.
But not afterwards.
Right. Post-Cold War, its strategic value dropped for the U.S. The sources even suggest the U.S. saw Yugoslavia's army as a potential threat.
And breaking it up fit into a sort of New World Order plan, preventing rivals.
That's the perspective offered in the sources, yes.
They also mention other things briefly, like Huntington's clash of civilizations and older historical issues.
Yeah, those get mentioned as contributing factors, though the focus is more on the nationalism and the partition plans.
So how did it actually start, the buildup?
The sources indicate preparations were happening quite early, maybe even 1988. The Yugoslav army building positions near Bosnian towns.
And after the 1990 elections, when nationalist parties gained power,
that really ramped things up. Serbian nationalist influence in the military grew, pushing separatist aims.
Then Bosnia itself started making moves. Territorial integrity law, cutting ties with the army.
Right, in late 91. And in response, a parallel to that, Bosnian Serbs declared their own autonomous regions in early 92.
And started arming secretly.
Yes. Then the date the sources give for the war starting is April 6, 1992. Attacks by the Yugoslav army and Bosnian Serb militias.
Starting with Sarajevo.
The shelling of Sarajevo began that April, yeah. Bosnian Serb forces joined in quickly.
And it spread fast, especially in the east.
Very fast. Eastern Bosnia, places like Visegrad, Foka, Zvornik, saw brutal violence driving out the Muslim population. Pretty soon, the Bosnian Serb forces, backed by the Yugoslav army, held, what was it?
About 2/3 of the country, the sources say?
A huge chunk, very quickly.
And the Bosnian side was really struggling.
Definitely. Their army was new, poorly armed, and the sources really stressed the impact of the UN arms embargo.
Saying it hurt the Bosnians more.
Disproportionately, yes.
Yeah.
Because the Serbs had access to the old Yugoslav army stockpiles. International help was mostly just humanitarian aid.
And the UN peacekeepers, UNPRA pro Ferrar, in the safe areas.
Deployed, yes, but the sources grimly note those safe areas often became targets themselves.
The sources also detail terrible atrocities.
Yes, committed by the Republika Srpska army against non-Serbs. Sieges like Sarajevo, camps, executions, mass rape, just horrific stuff.
They specifically mention Srebrenica in 95 and the Markali market shelling.
Key brutal events highlighted in the material, yes. The Srebrenica genocide is explicitly named.
So how did it finally end, according to these sources?
Well, the Bosnian army started making gains, like around Bihać, often with Croatian army help.
And some NATO airstrikes.
Limited strikes near Sarajevo. That pressure, the sources argue, brought the Serb leadership, represented by Milosevic for the Bosnian Serbs, to the table.
Which led to Dayton, Ohio in November 95.
Exactly. And the Dayton Agreement signed in December formally stopped the fighting.
But the sources look at Dayton with some reservation.
They acknowledge it ended the war, which was vital. But they pose the question, given the goals of partition and expulsion described earlier.
Was Dayton basically a kind of partition agreement itself, just stopping short?
That's the possibility they raise. It locked in place many of the territorial gains.
And what prevented a total, formal partition?
The sources credit the resistance of the Bosnian government and people. Their determination not to be carved up.
And they got help.
Yes, external support was key. The sources point specifically to Iranian military aid from early '93.
Claiming Clinton gave it a nod through Croatia.
That's the claim, yes. After the Washington Agreement between Bosnian Croats and the government, this aid, sources argue, was crucial.
It saved Bosnia from collapsing.
Prevented total collapse, yes. And that, the sources say, forced the international powers, the contact group, to accept the Muslims as a factor and push for the Dayton deal.
So wrapping this up based on the sources, it's a tangle of collapsing states, raw nationalism, big power politics.
And fierce local resistance, all colliding with devastating results.
It really shows how these big forces, as laid out here, have such immense human costs.
Absolutely, a tragic illustration.
And it leaves us thinking, based on this material, Dayton stopped the killing, saved lives, no question. But by freezing things largely along lines achieved through conflict, and maybe not fully resolving those partitionist goals mentioned in the sources, did it perhaps sow seeds for future problems within Bosnia?
A difficult question the sources seem to leave us with. Definitely something to consider.